There was always something about him, not in the dramatic, heart-thudding way that stories usually begin, not in the kind of presence that filled a room and demanded to be seen, but in the exact opposite. He was the kind of quiet that made people feel comfortable, the kind of stillness that didn't draw attention but kept it, effortlessly, in the soft way you remember a scent long after someone has left the room. His name was Caleb, and he was Claire's older brother, Claire, who had been Lila's best friend since middle school, whose house was her second home, whose family knew her face almost as well as her own did. And yet, it was Caleb, not Claire, who seemed to look at her as though she were made of something worth understanding. He wasn't around much when they were younger. College, then travel, then work that kept him out of town for long stretches of time. Lila remembered him only in fragments at first, the tall, quiet boy with a book in his hands during family barbecues, the occasional "Hey, you good?" when he passed by her in the hallway, the brief, polite smiles exchanged over dinner tables where he always spoke less than everyone else but somehow seemed to be listening more. But then came the summer after her last year of university, the summer when Claire moved abroad for work, when Lila started spending more time alone in that familiar house, taking care of Claire's dog while she was gone, watering the plants, checking the mail, and suddenly, Caleb was there again. Back in town, staying temporarily while his apartment was being renovated, working from home, moving quietly through the same spaces she occupied without ever making her feel like she was in the way. They didn't talk much at first. There were nods, the occasional shared breakfast when their schedules overlapped, brief conversations that hovered at the surface, weather, books, which street was closed again, how Claire was doing in Madrid, but beneath it all, there was a current, soft and steady, like music playing in the background that you don't notice until someone turns it off. And slowly, things began to shift. It was in the way he started making extra coffee in the mornings, even before she came downstairs, black, exactly how she took it. In the way he paused before turning off a light if he saw her curled up on the couch, reading too late again. In the way he didn't fill the silence with unnecessary noise but let it stretch between them like something comfortable, like something earned. He noticed things, the kind of noticing that wasn't loud or flattering, but precise. He noticed when she was tired, even when she tried to hide it. He noticed when she had been crying, even when her voice didn't crack. He noticed what made her laugh, not the jokes, but the moments, the ironies, the quiet absurdities she didn't think anyone else picked up on. And Lila, who had spent years being the listener, the helper, the one who held things together for other people, began to feel, slowly, terrifyingly, what it was like to be seen. Not admired. Not wanted. Just seen. And she didn't know what to do with that. Because he was Claire's brother. Because no one had ever looked at her like that before. Because part of her didn't trust that what she was feeling wasn't just the result of proximity, of loneliness, of borrowed domesticity in a house that never quite stopped feeling like home. But then came the night when everything turned. She was sitting on the porch, a blanket over her legs, the sky above thick with stars, and Caleb stepped outside without saying a word, handed her a mug of tea without asking if she wanted any, and sat down beside her, not too close, not too far. And in that pause, that long, quiet, unrushed pause, she felt it, the weight of something unsaid pressing gently against the space between them. He didn't look at her when he spoke. He just said, "You don't let many people see you, do you?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. And he didn't press. He just sipped his tea, the air between them full of questions neither of them was brave enough, yet, to ask. But from that night on, everything changed. Not suddenly. Not loudly. But in the way her breath caught when he walked into the room, in the way she noticed his silence differently now, not as absence, but as presence so deep it didn't need to announce itself. It's strange how something unspoken can take up so much space, how a single glance held a moment too long, a silence too heavy to be casual, can live inside your chest long after the moment itself has passed. In the days following that night on the porch, Lila began to move through the house differently, as though she had been marked by something invisible, not a confession, not a promise, but a quiet acknowledgement that something between them had shifted beyond friendship, beyond the soft familiarity of shared spaces and polite conversation. And though no words had passed between them to confirm it, she felt it in the way he looked at her now, not constantly, not dramatically, but with a kind of stillness that made her skin aware of itself in places it never had been before. Caleb hadn't changed outwardly. He still moved through the house with the same quiet presence, still asked about her day in that low, thoughtful voice, still brewed coffee early and left hers at the edge of the table without ceremony. But there was something in the pauses, in the way he lingered in the doorway when she was reading, in how he stood beside her in the kitchen without rushing to fill the silence, in the softness of his voice when he asked if she'd eaten, that felt like a language she was only now learning to understand. Not one built of words, but of attention. Of permission. And Lila, who had spent most of her life being fine, who had learned how to make herself small enough to fit other people's comfort, began to feel, for the first time, that she was taking up space in someone's world without having to fight for it. She wasn't sure when she started waking up thinking about him, not in the restless way of infatuation, but in the quieter rhythm of wondering where he was, if he was already downstairs, if she would hear his voice before noon. It wasn't even romantic, not at first. It was proximity that had turned into gravity, the slow pull of someone who had made her feel, not just noticed, but understood in a way that left no need for explanation. But there was also guilt. Claire's name hovered in her thoughts like a warning bell that never fully stopped ringing. This was her best friend's brother, the boy they used to joke about, dismissively, back when they were younger, the one who was always just the older brother who reads too much. Lila had never thought of him that way before. Or maybe she had, but never let herself feel it. And now that she did, the truth of it felt like something fragile, something too sacred to touch with careless hands. Still, the feelings didn't go away. If anything, they deepened, not through grand gestures, but through 100 small, almost unnoticeable moments, the way his fingers brushed hers when he handed her a glass, the way he leaned just slightly closer when she was talking, the way he seemed to remember every detail she ever shared, not in the way people remember facts, but in the way you carry someone's weight without needing to be asked. One evening, she found him in the living room, headphones on, working quietly, his brow furrowed. She stood in the doorway watching him for a moment longer than was appropriate, then said softly, "Hey." He looked up immediately, took off the headphones, smiled in that subtle, half-curved way of his, and asked, "You okay?" And it was such a simple question, one he had asked a dozen times before, but something in the way he said it made her throat tighten. "I don't know," she replied, almost without thinking. He stood, walked toward her, didn't touch her, just stood close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence, and said, "You don't have to figure it out alone." That night, she barely slept. Not because of anything he'd done, he hadn't even touched her, but because the way he stood in front of her made it impossible to pretend that what she felt wasn't real anymore. She tried to avoid him the next day, unsure of what to say, unsure if saying anything would make it worse. But avoiding Caleb was like trying not to notice the wind, you could pretend it wasn't there, but it would still move through you. And when he finally found her on the back steps that evening, knees drawn to her chest, eyes tired from the weight of her thoughts, he didn't ask what was wrong. He simply sat beside her, close but not touching, and waited. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't a confession, it wasn't even clear. She just whispered, "This wasn't supposed to happen." And he, with a voice gentler than she thought he was capable of, replied, "I know. But I don't want to unfeel it." And in that moment, Lila understood that there were some people who could see you, really see you, even when you're still figuring out who you are. That there are feelings that don't announce themselves with passion or fireworks, but arrive slowly, quietly, until they're the only truth you can't look away from. And for once, she didn't want to look away. Some people come into your life as background. And then one day, you realize they've been the main character all along.